Hello, and welcome to Gaming the Podcast. My name is John Robertson, and I'll be joined shortly by Stace Harman. Together, we are Indie by Design. We are video game design consultants and authors of books that celebrate games, their design, their history, and their culture. Just head over to indiebydesign.net for more on all of that. Now, this week, we're talking Elden Ring. Yes, again, we're talking about Elden Ring. Stace has completed the game after 200 hard-fought hours, and we're here to go through the results, the learnings, and the understanding that have come from that time with that game. Think of it as a well-informed review, if you will. Here's a clip to get us started.
And one other, whom grace would again bless, a tarnished of no renown. Cross the fog to the lands between, to stand before the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord.
Okay, so you are now an Elden Lord. How does that feel?
Well, it's been a long time coming. 200 hours. Yeah, I mean, I didn't expect it to take that long, to be honest. I thought it was going to be like an 80, 90 hour thing, but yeah, it's probably about 180 hours by the time I completed the game. I've done about 20 hours since. And had, I don't think it really dropped off for me at any point. I think I did wonder if it would start to become a bit of a slog at some point and I would need to just push through it. But I wouldn't say it was consistently the same quality all the way through, but I've enjoyed it or found things to enjoy in it all the way through. And yeah, it feels good to see the end of it. Although I would say that's probably not the end for me, because I am going to have a look at New Game Plus. However briefly, I don't think I'm not going to intend to go all the way back through to the end again. But I'd like to see how it changes. I've never really done New Game Plus in From Software games. Kind of just dipped my toe in it, and I may just do the same thing here to see how the scaling works and see how it kind of feels to play those early game levels or areas again. But this time, kind of fully souped up. But yeah, I mean, it's been awesome. It's been a lot of fun, I do have some gripes. There is some stuff that I would like to see perhaps for, a future title, or even potentially patched into this one at some point. I don't think that From Software will be listening to this, and I don't think they'll care even if they are, but I certainly wouldn't claim it's perfect. I think that would be silly. But it is overwhelmingly, positive. All of those reviews, those 10 out of 10 reviews, and it's, the last time I looked, it was sitting at like 97 on Metacritic. I think that is deserved, and I think it's justified, but that doesn't mean to say that it is perfect, but it's been quite a ride that I am still experiencing. And I think my time of it's kind of evolved, and I've changed kind of the way that I play it over that time. And so, it's been a thing that has kept fresh for me. I didn't get to a point where I was kind of dreading having to get through the last couple of bosses or anything like that.
Yeah, I've played New Game Plus on a couple of From Software games, and it's much harder. Or it has been in the past, like much harder. Like, even though you've got like more experience and more stuff, it's the difficulty ramps up to a point where it's significantly harder than just going through the game the first time.
Yeah. And I don't know if because I've enjoyed being at the end of the game. It feels a bit like a well-earned sort of, there's like a holiday feeling of not really being that challenged until you go back into some of the late game areas to perhaps find specific weapons or sorceries or whatever, because that's something I've been doing, is hunting down some of those to take forward into New Game Plus. And really just to keep experiencing the world and keep playing the game. I've been kind of just finding things to do like that, finding some of the bosses that I didn't see the first time through. But some of it's nice to have that period of kind of empowerment where you go back to certain areas and you're really not going to be troubled by, these enemies, because even if they do hit you, it's like they've just sort of flicked you or tickled you or something, because you've got so much defense and such a big health bar that they're not really doing any damage. Yeah. I'm expecting when I go back into the game in New Game Plus that it will feel much more like it did the first time. There's much more caution required, and much more just, you don't get to just rush in and kind of with impunity. Yeah. I think the only thing that sort of the saddest thing, I suppose, is how I feel about it, is that although New Game Plus can, to some extent, reflect, it can kind of, I can revisit that feeling of, I remember what it was like to go through Stormvale Castle and have to be, a bit careful about what I was doing, and that particular guy in that particular room killing me 500 times. What it can't do, is that slight sort of whimsical thing, or sort of, I have a slight bittersweet, I suppose, feeling about it, is that I won't be able to experience all of those things again for the first time. And that, that's...
Yeah, it can't surprise, really.
It can't surprise, and it can't have that same, like, you step out of, Stormvale and look over Liurnia, and it doesn't have that same, like, wow. I remember when I felt like I'd seen so much of the game already. I remember when I only had, like, 3 map fragments, and I didn't know how big the world was even at that point. It's quite a, I think there's some parallels there with kind of just growing up in kind of my own life and being aware of different boundaries and different frontiers. And it can't do that again. And it's kind of sad. It's important for me, for my sort of personal enjoyment, to try and remember what it felt like, to sort of go through those same motions and just try and remember what it felt like, even though it is just a memory of a feeling rather than the feeling itself. So
you want New Game Plus to be like a sequel? Basically, here's like a new area.
That would be nice.
It's bigger than the original area, because like
Elden Ring 2.
Sequels always got to be bigger. So, New Game Plus, here you go. Here's like a cave system that you need to
fill it with towers and turn it into a completely different game. I would like to see some DLC for sure. Definitely, like further down the line, that does introduce new areas. I'd like to see something like that, but. Yeah, that thrill of the new can't be replicated, but such is life. That's just the way that it is.
Yeah. Okay. The thrill of the new is kind of gone, but to go back to what you've already played, over 200 hours. You mentioned at the start that it surprised you in the sense that you consistently played it from start to end over 200 plus hours. And there were elements that kept you coming back. What were those elements, you think, looking back on it now? What were the things that sort of retained your interest, kept you excited to motivated to come back?
I think definitely the sense of exploration and really the way that you do, not just the way you unlock the map, because that's reasonably standard in the sense that you do one action. In this case, you pick up a map fragment, and that reveals a tremendous geographical area, not dissimilar to climbing up a Ubisoft tower or going to one of the tool necks in Horizon or something like that. You get a lot of information in one go. What I liked here was that was geographical information or like topographical information rather than detail, rather than gameplay content. It was just, you've unlocked this region you can look at and you can pore over it like you would a map and see that there's some outlines there of what looks like perhaps ruins, and you can go there and visit and find out what that is. So the sense of exploration, even once you had unlocked something like the map piece, was kind of constant for me. And the fact that it is the way that it is created is very much open world, certainly the most open world game that From Software has done, meant that there was multiple directions to go in. So that I got a lot from that. I got a lot from not having to go into this particular sort of walled off area and do that. I had to do that area. I couldn't do anything else until I was able to go to completely different places or go and bang my head against completely different bosses and, just think, well, okay, I don't have to keep doing this. I can just put this on hold for a bit and go somewhere else. And that, I think that did a lot for my sense of kind of freshness, and the consistently brought me back to keep playing it, because it wasn't just like, I didn't have to have that thought of, I'm going to put Elden Ring on, I'm stuck on that particular bit. Because that might be true, but it's like, but I can go anywhere else. It's not like I have to. I'm not in a linear game. I'm not playing, The Last of Us or whatever. I have to do this bit before I can see any more of the game. So I'll just go and do something else.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I didn't really. I mean, there were certainly moments where I got frustrated with particular bosses. I think there were some bosses that were just like bang out of order, but for the most part, I avoided a lot of frustration that I've had and that I've experienced with other From Software titles, because it was just a much smoother ride, like the curve was much gentler because there was always the option of going somewhere else and doing something else and still then getting a sense of progress, still then enjoying the act of playing the game without the, I've got to kill this thing, otherwise I can't see anything else that this game has to offer. So that was a big part of it, the sense of exploration and the sense of always having something to do, and kind of play the game in depending on what suited me.
Did that ever manifest in a frustrating way? And I ask that because it hasn't for me yet. I mean, I haven't completed the game. I'm not even 100 hours in. But I was talking to someone about this the other day, and they were saying that they've gotten to a point where they have become a bit frustrated at the lack of direction because now they just don't know where to go. And I was a bit surprised, I guess, that they'd said that because, I'm not surprised that they said that, but I just don't see it that way. For me, like not knowing where to go was almost, or is almost a good thing in that it's just like, well, I'll just go over there then. But yeah, I was talking to someone who was a bit frustrated. They've played it for a roughly similar amount of time than me, approaching 100 hours ish. And then, they were saying, I wish at this point, now that I'm 100 hours in, I wish now I did know a bit more about just like where to go rather than just a constant go over there and see what happens for 100 hours.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that. It's not something that I experienced. And it was something that I thought that I would. I did think I was going to get to a point and not crave direction necessarily, but crave some more curated pacing was what I thought I was going to need and want and miss. I thought I was just going to have this, like, if I'm always determining my own pace through this, then I might get a bit kind of bored with that, or I might get a bit sort of bogged down with it. I would like just a sort of some content where I'm moving through.
Yeah, so it's like diversity of pacing. Yeah, and so, but I didn't have that thing of I didn't experience frustration with not really knowing where to go. I think there's some signposting that is done. There's a lot of signposting that absolutely isn't done for sure, but there is some signposting that is done in any given area. There's the flames that come out of these sites of grace that give you a broad direction to head in, which that I think was always enough for me. I didn't want like a list of objectives, like, go to this place and do this, and as my next, like, what shall I do? That said, I do have a friend who, the language he uses when he plays games is often different, particularly games like this. He'll have a lot of games that he has got either coming up that he wants to play or that he's bought a few games at a time. And he will often talk about, like, getting it done. He'll often talk about, I want to get that done so then I can move on to such and such. And I think with that, and I understand that mentality. It's sort of like a tick list of things, and it's meant I think it comes from a good place in wanting to see everything that a game has to offer, but also to move on to newer things and fresher things. And I can imagine if you feel a bit like that's one sort of one place or one focus from which that feeling of frustration at not being more directed may come from, because it's like, I'm enjoying this, but I want it to end at some point. Like, I don't want it to just be, I don't want to accidentally go off on a side quest that's another 20 hours that actually, when I'm trying to focus on making sort of main narrative progress. But no, not for me. I didn't really have that at all, which I'm pleased about. Yeah, as I say, I did think I might want at some point, might crave kind of, I guess, like being told a story. Like I thought I might crave the pacing, the deliberately curated pacing of a sort of 10-hour bit where it's like it ramps up. There are peaks and troughs and stuff, but there was enough of that, I think, despite the sort of general lack of guidance that you have, or
the multitude of options that you have, depending on it's kind of the same thing to me. It's like it depends on how you look, how you view it, I suppose. So yeah, no, I wasn't really frustrated by the structure of the game or the pacing of the game at any point. It was mainly just a couple of bosses that, and to be fair, the bosses that frustrated me the most were optional. So that that's a thing that you can just walk away from that. You don't have to keep banging your head against the brick wall.
Yeah, about banging your head against the brick wall. Did you what did you like? How many different builds did you use? Character builds? Did you stick to the same build the whole time and like level up that path of weapons and arts and stats and whatever, or did you respec and try different things? Yeah, I went through phases with it. I think I would say the most respecing that I've done has been right at the end of the game, like post completion. This is where I've experimented the most. I've tried like a faith build. I was like a typical kind of melee dex build. Firstly using like dual flails. Well, once upon a time I was using a shield. I was playing it like I played, a Souls game. And then I think a conversation that we had, or was it multiplayer or something we were talking about, kind of, it did sort of push me into, or inspire me to try something different and think, well, I'm kind of limiting myself by having this shield. That's always a part of my build. And that's not, I'd like to try just not getting hit, rather than relying on a physical defense. I'd like to try just actually not getting hit. And so then I moved over to like the dual wielding and dual wielded flails, and then katanas and whips as well. So there was, I tried out I experimented within the remit of a melee dex build, during kind of the main game. And then, as I say, since completing it, I've then put together I've respec'd a couple of times with a faith build and now a sorcery melee-ish build. So yeah, and that's been enjoyable to tap into those different parts of the game that I wasn't really using before, because I wasn't using, I didn't use faith, I didn't use incantations really at all. I think not even really at all, genuinely at all. My faith was like 6 for the entire game, because that's what it started at, and I never put points into it. So going and looking at what that means and how you play and how that affects fighting certain enemies, because of the pacing of that, the interaction with that enemy based on the way that you are attacking them, and the distance that you need to keep, and that's been a sort of almost a intellectual pursuit in sort of the interest and the satisfaction that's generated for me is in like, I wonder how this would work. It's like an experiment, I suppose, rather than I'm now going to play like this for another 40 hours. So, and some of that was driven just by weapons. It was I could pick up a weapon and be like, oh, this looks cool. I need a few extra points in X, so I'm going to spend a bit of time leveling that. But by and large, my main playthrough of the main game was a sort of melee dex build. And I think if I do New Game Plus, I will definitely change that. I'll do something completely different because, I've done 200 hours almost of one thing, so I think I can probably push the boat out a little bit. I didn't really, that sort of wasn't part of the exploration or of the keeping things fresh, wasn't tied to constant respecking. I didn't need to respec. I didn't choose to respec for any particular boss fight. I know that's been a tactic I've seen, or sort of recommendations I've seen for certain bosses. It's like you're going to have a better time of it if you respec to this. But no, I didn't do that. There was even those bosses that I was on for a long time, Melania being the obvious one. And Melania, for anyone who doesn't know, it's one of the key kind of concept images, and from the trailer, and also from I think the collector's edition had a statue of her. She's the human build, red-haired, kind of Valkyrie looking character. She has a very long katana, and she's got prosthetic. She's kind of it feels a bit like a Sekiro enemy. She's got like prosthetic limbs because Scarlet Rot has eaten away loads of her body, and she is an incredibly tough fight. But for a long time I used her as kind of the
she was kind of my anchor point. She was sort of always the thing that I came back to. That fight was what I was trying to achieve. And sometimes I would go into that, try it a couple of times, and then be like, okay, I'm just going to go off for a few hours and do other stuff, but always returning to her. Or sometimes I would just spend 20 tries in a row trying to beat her. So
yeah. What was the length of time between encountering her in the boss fight, and then eventually overcoming the battle?
I would say I was probably fighting her on and off. It's got to be at least, I don't know, like I'd say 20 hours or something. I think probably a good 10% of my playthrough was spent fighting Melania, or having Melania as the focus of what I was doing, at least.
Did you feel that you were under-leveled, or was it just a case of
no,
learning?
It just wasn't good enough. Yeah, it was learning. And I've watched a lot of videos on her since beating her, actually. I watched them like while I was trying to fight her, and I was like looking at different ways of should you summon people in. And this applies to a lot of different bosses. People will have probably similar stories or be able to relate to this. Trying different experiments with, does it work to use like a spirit summon, or does it work to bring somebody into your game and try that, or does it work to do it solo? Some of the other boss fights, you can use Torrent, like Radahn. You can use Torrent if you're on your own, but you can't if you summon people in. So I enjoyed exploring all of that. And for whatever reason, I think partly because I really enjoyed that fight. And I've always had a thing in the Souls games or the From Software games about enjoying, or being more predisposed to enjoy, whether it works out in reality or not, I don't know, but like fights against human style enemies, because they to me are the more interesting. Like this has to be designed in a different way. This isn't just some massive monster that if I'm behind it can hit me with its tail, and in front of it can claw me, or chew me up and swallow me and whatever, or do area of effect that affect a massive area because it's so huge. This feels like a more one-on-one. I was just kind of more up for that fight, and so I went into it, and I think that's why I didn't ever get frustrated with it, because I enjoyed it. I liked the character. I liked a lot of the stuff that I've seen about it since beating her was around like, is she unfair? Is she unfair in the sense that she breaks or bends or breaks some of the rules of the game that you are implicitly taught up to that point about how bosses or characters, enemies behave when you're fighting them? So things like being able to cancel out of a stagger animation, she can do that, which nobody else can do, or no other normal enemy can do, at least. And part of all of that is just what made me enjoy the fight so much, was that it was a new set of rules I needed to learn. And yeah, I mean, I can see that why some people would say that she's complete expletive, insert word, but I just enjoyed it. I just enjoyed it kind of from start to finish. The fact that it's an optional boss, I think, helps that. It's like, well, you really don't have to do this. This character, this boss design doesn't owe you anything. You're not like, they don't have to make it a certain way just so that you can get over it.
Yeah, I find on the human enemies, the like regular size, regular sort of human body enemies, they're I was going to say they're harder to read than like the big obvious signposting movements and motions of like a dragon or whatever. Like it's pretty obvious when a dragon's about to launch into like a tail whip, or is going to jump into the sky and try and burn you or whatever. But fighting a regular size and shaped enemy, sort of like the reading of the patterns of there is more intricate, like their movements are smaller, so you've got to be much more laser focused on making sure that you're reading and countering what you think they're about to do.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely true of Melania. And I think one of the key things, probably two of the key things that make her really difficult, beyond that needing to read things that aren't telegraphed in as obvious a way. They're telegraphed when she's going to do a move, but you don't know what it's going to be. So there's a certain amount of reading it, but then reacting still. It's not just, well, I know that when that monster, lifts its arm up, it's going to do a claw attack. There's no like fake outs with those enemies. With this, there feels a bit more like that, because you have to, okay, there's a little flash on her blade that says she's going to attack, but then it's like, but how is she going to attack? And then being able to read that. and then responding in the appropriate way, that's where a lot of the sort of practice needed. I needed a lot of practice in working that out, how to manage that. But she does probably two things that are could be considered cheap or cheesy or annoying or badly designed, is that when she hits you, even if you're using a shield, for those people that do, she takes energy back from you. So you don't need to take damage, she just needs to inflict it, and that can be inflicting it on your shield, and that's fine. She regains energy, health. And also she's a 2-phase boss fight, but she has 2 full health bars, which is quite unusual. Normally with the 2-phase boss fights, it's a half, you get them down to half their full energy bar, their full health bar, and then they go into the second phase. This is
like Radahn, it's like that.
Yeah, exactly. You have to beat her, and then you have to beat her again, basically. And if you die in phase 2, you got to do it all over again. So I absolutely can understand the frustrations. I think I really enjoy it, and it was I think it's my favourite Souls fight. I wouldn't say
This is my favourite for all Souls bosses.
Yeah, and I think I would draw a line in saying, is it the best? And I was like, well, that's a very subjective thing, but that's where I think it can get quite heated, because what one person likes about that fight and holds up as the worst example of From Software boss design, somebody else might hold up as the best. So I would just simply say she's my favourite boss fight of any that I've encountered in a Souls game. And that's what gave me the motivation and the patience to not get frustrated with it, but to do it for hours on end. And that when I beat her, I was so focused on what I was doing, and this I think speaks to some of the things that I've just mentioned there, that there wasn't like a doing it by numbers. There wasn't a rote learning to, she's going to do this attack, then this one, etc. And I just need to go through the motions. I was so kind of invested and concentrated on what was happening that when I beat her, I didn't even know that was about to happen. She died, and I was like, oh wow. I just sat there in kind of silence, and then there was like relief, and then there was elation. I went through this whole kind of emotional journey because I had to concentrate the whole time. There wasn't like, oh, she's getting down really low on her health bar, like what move do I want to do to finish it? There was none of that. It was just like, oh, I've beaten her, wow. And that felt good as well, because it was like, that's, I had to concentrate from start to finish. There was no just, I'm bored of this, if only I could get that final hit in, and everything else I've done a million times. It was the fight felt quite different every time I did it, or different to an extent every time I did it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think Malenia is definitely my favorite in Elden Ring, and I think in the wider From Software games, and I think can be held up as a real example of how divisive From Software games can be, and how much people can love and or hate them, or love and hate them at the same time. I think is kind of encompassed by this one boss fight. But outside of her, there were obviously dozens of other boss fights that I did, some of which I didn't enjoy at all.
Was it the most difficult, do you think, in the game?
It was, yeah, I think it was. It was for me. And bizarre, and that is one of, again, in these things I've watched since beating her, she is on certain lists, she is ranked as the hardest From Software boss in any game. There's a couple of others that are contenders, I think, from both Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3. There's a couple from those that are high up on the list. But for me, certainly she was. Bizarrely, there's another contender from Elden Ring, the Godskin duo, which are considered to be incredibly difficult, irritating, annoying. They've got a bit of a gimmick that they have one health bar, but they each have individually, they have health bars too. And once you've knocked the health bar down of one of them entirely, they die, but only temporarily. So you have to have depleted that overall health bar entirely. Otherwise, they keep coming back, which is one of the things that makes them so difficult. So you have to beat them at least 2 or 3 times each in order to get that overall health bar down to 0. The odd thing about that fight for me was that I think I did it on my second go, and so I wasn't exposed to any of the like the rage inducing behavior or moments that other people have seemingly have been, and that wasn't, I didn't beat it second time because I was so amazing, or it was just like one of those random things. It felt like that it just turned out that way, and it really was not a big deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's another thing, like there is no sort of objective or it's hard to have objective ranking on what is the hardest this, that, or the other, because well, it can just be completely random. It's an odd thing.
So to change it up a bit then, so you mentioned that you've got gripes, looking back on it, gripes with the game. How could that be possible when it's a 97% on Metacritic?
Yeah. Well, nothing's perfect. Nothing is perfect. So it is amazing.
Where does it fall down in that 3%?
Well, in my esteemed opinion. So there's a couple of things that I would like to see done. I think, and they speak to some of the quality of life / accessibility side of things. I don't want it made easier. I'm not like, I think this, everybody should be able to play and complete this game. I'm not really of that opinion in terms of ability level, as opposed to other concerns with like mobility or disability concerns, rather than just like, I'm not good enough. But I don't think it should be a thing that everybody should be able to complete necessarily. But I think there's certain things on kind of information tracking, which you can always just use a good old pen and paper, obviously. But it's a game that I feel is very much best approached by it being the game that you're playing for an extended period of time. Because if you go away, and we've talked a bit about this with other games, like things like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, which if you go away and come back and you're quite far through those games, you can be rusty. You can have kind of forgotten the muscle memory that you need to get into the flow of the combat. It's not a combat thing here in Elden Ring, but it's if you go away for a few days and you come back, it's just the notion of what was I doing, or where am I with this particular side quest, or where did Rani say she was disappearing to next? And there's just no way to track that in the game, or not even any clues on that beyond the fact that they added the ability to see where NPCs are on the map. So if you really wanted to, you could seek them out visually on the map. But yeah, that has a knock-on effect to there not really being any tracking, has a knock-on effect to you sometimes doing side quests and not really knowing or remembering why you're doing it or what it is you're even trying to achieve with them. And I just feel like that's more of a shame than anything. I think it could be made more compelling by there being better tracking, and I get, that could be even just there's letters and stuff that you find in the game. It could just be like a text thing of correspondence of just like the story so far kind of thing. Just a way of then dipping back into that to then re-engage yourself in the narrative aspects as much as anything else, as to where you are in that quest line and what decisions you've made so far, and to help you inform what you might want to do coming up. So it's kind of an information tracking thing. And then there's the information surfacing as well. There was a point where I got stuck and just didn't know how to get from one place to another, and I had to look it up, or felt that I had to look it up. I think traveling from Liendel to the mountaintop of the giants, I think you have to go through to a particular place and you go up in a lift. And I just I'd been there, and I remember it saying you need this particular medallion, or you can only come back here once you've done X. But 20 hours later, I'd forgotten about that. And I just couldn't work out how to get from this part of the map to this part of the map. I dare say there was other ways I could have found that information out, but I looked it up online, and I understand that's, there's a reaction to, that's a point of contention for a lot of people, that some people feel that is an absolute failure of game design if that's what you're having to do. And I completely understand that. So but I don't want to go too far down that path or rather I don't want the game to go too far down that path, because some of the mystery is part of the enjoyment, and working out from letters or item descriptions or whatever it might be that, this is actually, this is that blade of such and such that those other people were talking about. There's no like Zelda music. You don't open a chest and you've now got that thing. Return to X with this, this thing. You have to read into that and be engaged with it. So there is definitely a limit to how much I would like to see that information surfaced or tracked, but just a bit more, just so you don't feel disengaged or disenfranchised or lost, I suppose. For an extended period of time. So
you don't want it. So you don't want pressing down on the D-pad to then have a little a yellow or blue holographic line that pops up and says
no,
go.
I really don't. And having played Elden Ring, it would be amazing. It would be really good, I think, if the sort of the legacy of Elden Ring is that it allows or encourages other teams to look at that and take a few more risks with how you navigate their worlds and how much they trust the player or how much they allow that to happen without feeling the need to do exactly that. Press down on the D-pad to get this gust of wind in Ghost of Tsushima, or always have the compass at the top that's showing you, you need to go there and then you need to go here. I do feel like that does damage engagement and immersion, because you end up following the systems rather than the game, the content. It's like,
I think what that does is it makes it very explicitly clear that you're on a psychological level that you're either following the main path or you're not. Whereas in Elden Ring, you're not sure whether you're on the quote unquote main path or not. So it's just about how you interpret. It's not necessarily the line itself that's the objective line itself, or the objective marker itself, that's the problem. It's what it does psychologically. Like now that this is quote unquote towards, we're now moving forwards in the story, in the line of the in the journey of the game, or we've now decided not to.
And that for me would, I think, damage immersion, because I guess it's sort of a thing that that your character doesn't know, and that's there's like, I quite like the let's discover this together, let's map this region, let's, having got this map segment, pour over that map and see, that looks like a cave, I'm going to head there and see if it's something in the way that your character would. It feels almost like we talked a couple of weeks ago about, like, when you play games, what role do you take up and who are you when you play games. That kind of discovery allows me to feel that me and my character are kind of in this together, kind of like we're like allies, or we're kind of like travel companions or something, rather than just, I know where we should be going and I'm going to point you in the direction and that's where you're going to go, and then you're going to get there and swing a sword and pick up, the loot. It's more of a joint thing. So that, I think the information tracking / surfacing thing, I think I would prefer it if that were a bit improved to keep you or to just prevent confusion, or as much confusion. Some confusion's great, being lost a bit is great, but just not like, it'd be horrible if people were just giving up on the game because they didn't know what to do next. That's not great. And then there was a couple of bosses that were, I just felt that like they were like just pure cheese, and that I didn't enjoy. They were the ones that I got really annoyed fighting. But again, they were optional. I didn't need to do it. But that's like there's like a point of pride and ego that comes into it. It's like, well, I've beaten Melania, I should be able to beat this bell-bearing hunter in Khalid, which was one of my least favourites. And I think that's not an uncommon thing, obviously, in From Software games, to have certain bosses that are just like, it's like they are designed deliberately to troll you. It's like, there's a real like cheat. It feels like the developer is kind of winking at you whilst you're being pummeled into the ground 500 times in a row. But again, it's optional, so that's up to you whether you engage with that or not. So I would say that I'm not done with Elden Ring yet. I would say even 200 hours in, I've got some other stuff to do. I'm kind of playing with a mate, kind of going into his game, and then we're just exploring some of the world together, and I'm acting as a little bit of a guide and being like, well, this is what we could do next. We could go over here and do this, catacombs or whatever. So I'm sure I'll rack up some more hours in that sense. PvP I haven't really engaged with much at all beyond doing it for some quest lines. And then, I will at some point start New Game Plus. And I think I'm very close to that. I think I've basically got everything that I want to get or can get before stepping into New Game Plus, and then being put back in my place and not being super powerful anymore, and actually being, back to being kind of a runt.
Have you been looking at guides to know whether you have seen picked up
for the new.
done,
Yeah, I have for the
everything.
New Game Plus stuff. Yeah, there's several lists of things like things to do before you start New Game Plus, because there's things that carry over, things that don't, and that's, I guess, another thing. It's like, information surfacing of knowing that, or just, I don't know. It would be. And it doesn't need to be done explicitly, like as a system within the game. I think certain items having certain properties or something that tells you from an in-game perspective that this won't carry over, and you just know that because it's all the items that are, I don't know, like have this as a property, or all the items that you get from these types of bosses or whatever it might be. Like, these are the things that aren't going to carry over. Because I've looked at guides for that. And I've also, barring a couple of endings that I would need to go through the game a couple of times to get, or do some manipulation of cloud saves, I almost have a platinum trophy on it. I've beaten all of the bosses. And in terms of trophy design, I think it's done really well. It isn't like kill 500 things with this weapon, because it isn't really that type of game. It's like, it's more of an achievement based thing of going through and beating all these optional bosses. And so, I find that I think I'm like, including the platinum, 4 trophies off, so 3, 2 of which are endings. So maybe one day further down the line, that'll be a thing that I might use as a motivation to continue to play it. But otherwise, I will soon jump into New Game Plus, and as I say, go back to feeling massively underpowered and needing to get good again.
The great Elden Ring was shattered. In our home, across the fog, the lands between. Now, Queen Marika the Eternal is nowhere to be found.
Thanks for listening. Now, please do remember to subscribe if you haven't already. We are available via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and literally anywhere else you might think to get podcasts. And if you've got time, if you could leave us a 5-star review, that would be absolutely fantastic. A reminder that a video version of Gaming the Podcast is available via YouTube. Just visit the Indie by Design YouTube channel to check that out. And if you'd like to stay up to date with future podcasts, books, any special offers we're running on the books, then please do visit indiebydesign.net and follow us on Twitter. We are at Indie by Design. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.